name is Saara Rei, and I'm American-born, originally born in Chicago, but lived a really long time in San Francisco, the Bay Area, and then moved to Berlin around 2013. I have a day job, so I'm originally a mathematician, a research mathematician. So I have a Ph.D. in mathematics, and I left academia some years ago to go into industry, and I found my way into the gaming industry, and I now work as a game designer. So.
And what kind of games?
Right now I'm making some mobile games with strong stories and having little puzzles inside of the stories that maybe somebody has to solve. So a lot of mystery-based puzzles at the moment, but I've worked before also in the gambling industry, being a slot game designer. So, and I did that also when I lived in Sweden for some time.
And why was your travel to Berlin? Why did you choose Berlin as your new home?
It's a good question. So I actually did Erasmus in Germany in like 2010 in Kaiserslautern. So I was there, and when I was there, I also really loved living in Germany, but also being in Europe in general. I also have European roots in my family, so my family is very multi-culti, and it felt very comfortable actually to be in Europe for me in general. And so I thought perhaps maybe I would like to live in Europe. And then I was doing my Ph.D. at UC Berkeley in California, and my advisor was a joint professor there and at TU Berlin, and I was really feeling like a little bit of a change, and so I kind of went up to her and asked her like, hey, can I come to Berlin with you? And then she said yes, and I actually didn't think it was going to happen because she's not the best at paperwork, but then it ended up happening, and she said I could come to Berlin with her and work with her there, and then I did, and I like instantly fell in love with the city. It actually reminds me like a lot of San Francisco in many ways. It kind of has a lot of similar characteristics and vibes, and I just loved it. It was really refreshing, so then I just stayed, and I ended up not going back to California.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you think there's something special about Berlin in the case of how singles or couples meet, or different than somewhere else? Or
in terms, I mean, yes, definitely. Although I think I have a very special perspective coming from San Francisco, because I think actually some of the characteristics both cities share is actually their kind of, I will call it free love spirit, or having a very open-minded culture that is actually very easily accessible. So I've lived in many places around the world, and like I said, I have family from Iran, family from the UK, family from Eastern Europe, from Russia, and so on. And I've lived in Sweden and various other countries, and at least in the Western world, yeah, it's still very closed. Like, I think these things still exist. You can find kink. Even in Dubai, you can find kink. You can find kind of alternative sexualities, people who have alternative kinds of relationships to the norm. But something that makes both Berlin and San Francisco really special is that it's kind of open to the public in a way. So also growing up in San Francisco and spending my adult life there, actually most of the time I was in non-monogamous relationships, and I actually had to even step back and question myself, because that was kind of the norm there, that there were so many people in different kinds of non-monogamous relationships that I actually had to say, like, do I want this? Like, is this actually what I want, or do I want to be alternative in this reality and be monogamous? Similar to San Francisco and in Berlin, it's also very open. It's very easily accessible. Like, you can just kind of come into the city and you can find the Kit Kat Club. So even if you're not connected to anybody who is non-monogamous, kinky, or living any kinds of alternative lifestyle, you can just basically you don't even have to Google it. You have to, you just kind of look at clubs and you find public open clubs where you will be exposed to alternative relationships and alternative lifestyles of all kinds. And these are in public spaces. And I think that's what makes it different, what makes it easily accessible, and what kind of allows Berlin to challenge the norm. And I think that in Berlin in general, and this is something that I like about Berlin in comparison to the US and in comparison to San Francisco in particular, is that in San Francisco, people live to work, and then in Berlin, people work to live. And I think that was something that really caught me about this city, is that people really cherish their quality of life and how they live, and being able to have the freedom to be themselves and express all that is them. And for instance, in the city, if you go on the M10, you might see the tram. Here you might see a 70-year-old man wearing a full body latex suit, and nobody will even look, because in the city there's kind of this, it's a little bit nihilistic in feeling, from my opinion, but also there's this vibe of, it's okay, it doesn't matter to me, it's, the people almost have this es mir egal feeling to them. And I think that also this gives this kind of freedom of, okay, I can live the relationships I want, and I can be how I want, and I put this out in the public, and also that in the city also allows it to be accessible, allows it to be in the public eye, that, it's not has to be hidden in a dark corner, in a dark basement. In fact, one of the first spaces that I encountered in Berlin that was for BDSM and sexuality was actually a very white dance yoga looking kind of space with big windows. The neighbors could look inside, and fresh and clean, and not anywhere close to the stereotype anybody would have about kink and BDSM in general. So it was not this kind of swinger club dungeon vibe that people would necessarily associate with kink, even though of course it exists in Berlin too, but all exists in Berlin.
So what different kinds of relationship did you encounter here?
I've encountered all kinds of relationships in Berlin, and I've been in all kinds of relationships. I've been able to explore all kinds of relationships, I think, because people are so open about it. I've encountered relationships where there'll be one person who has many partners, many serious partners, that maybe they live in the same house together, and maybe it's not even necessarily the case that those partners are partners with each other. So kind of this more you would call it a V shape, where there's one person and maybe two other people, or N other people. Also people who kind of have what's called relationship anarchy, where they don't necessarily want to define, okay, this is my boyfriend, this is my lover, this is my, play partner, but they more try to have a fluidity and not the normal boundaries of what it means to that you would put on a relationship, i.e. in particular with sexuality. So they might have sexual interactions with friends, with people that they like to do something very particular with, like spanking or rope bondage. And then that person might, become close to them or not so close. And so to kind of have this undefined, more almost activities, doing sexual things as an activity with another person, and that can be separate than the emotional bond you have. And it's almost this kind of deconstruction of a relationship. Okay, we usually put everything in one person. At least that's kind of the common societal norm that we're all taught when we're children, or at least what I was taught as a child. And now suddenly Berlin has invited the possibility, or the Berlin I know, of deconstructing all of these elements that we usually put in our romantic partner, and saying, okay, I can have these elements with other people, and I can actually kind of choose my own adventure in terms of how I want to relate to other people, and how I also want my romantic partners those partnerships to look.
And yet you have the impression that the circumstance that everything is available, nothing really matters, or is it the opposite?
In Berlin in particular, I think that I always like to say that the best thing about Berlin is that nobody gives a shit about anything, and the worst thing about Berlin is that nobody gives a shit about anything. And I don't think this is necessarily something having to do with people being in open relationships or having alternative kinds of relationships, but something that is a very unique vibe of Berlin. When I lived in Sweden, for instance, I also knew a lot of people who were sex positive and very open and in many different kinds of relationships, maybe in even something called a polycule, and everything really matters, and they have meetings with each other and scheduled events, and the relationships really matter. And I think that there's of course people in Berlin who also really care about their relationships and their partners, but there's this general cultural vibe of Berlin, of like, I don't give a shit. And I think this allows for our freedom, but I think the dark side of this is that sometimes people can also have really vapid relationships or vapid interactions. And yeah, I think that's at least my opinion. And, but I think everything has a positive side and a negative side to it. And I think that's the flip side of Berlin, and this freedom of not giving a shit and being able to be however you want without anybody caring also means that nobody cares.
Have you encountered some unusual trends, or that are what you think about could be the future of relationships, or are there different vibes, something that's special? The future of relationships in general.
I mean, in general, like even when you just look at pop culture and media, when you go to Netflix and so on, you see like TV shows like Bonding, and you see also people who are maybe dating multiple people or have two partners, or this polyamorous question kind of comes up. I also see that there's tendencies, for instance, for partners to maybe explore dating a person together. There's also dating apps like Field, and also Tinder is also going in this direction as well. And OkCupid, kind of all these dating apps start to have more detailed preferences in them, like not just about gender, but also sexuality, relationship preferences. You can also be on the app and still have a partner. You can even link your profile to your partner. And all these kinds of trends in pop culture and in dating apps, they kind of help like massage these ideas into the norm of society, so that when somebody goes onto these dating apps, maybe there's somebody who never thought about these things before, but suddenly they're exposed. And these dating apps also define, in a way, like our modern dating culture around the world. And like when they kind of set like, these are the parameters of like a person dating in this world, then they also define the culture, or they redefine the culture and they redefine the norms, where I think that our generation and younger, that's kind of, those are household words already. And so I think that you can see this shift. That being said, I think that I live in a bubble for sure. I've lived in San Francisco and I've lived in Berlin. And even when I've left these cities to live in, say, a city like Stockholm, which is also extremely liberal in comparison to the grand scheme of the rest of the world, and very open-minded and very progressive, it seemed extremely conservative to me. And so it's also something that I've had to learn to recognize, of course, is that I have a certain perception, and I also have to recognize that if I go outside of Berlin, even just outside of the city limits, like things change dramatically. And if I go to other countries and other cultures, of course, things change dramatically. For instance, my partner and I, we're going to go to Athens this month, and we're going to teach some kinky workshops, because that's something that has become a kind of second career for myself, as being a performance artist and workshop facilitator for kink themes, relationship themes, playing, relating, group play dynamics and so on, different kinds of workshops of different kinky topics or alternative topics. And when we are going to Athens, the people hosting us, they're really excited to have us. And I will be doing rope bondage on my partner. And he's male. He's a cis male, and they said that the last time they've only had a cis male guy be tied by somebody else once their entire time there, and that it's unusual and interesting for them. And I'm coming from another place where maybe that's still not as common, but still it's much more normal. And then when we also ask them about, you know, what's the kink education there? Are there workshops? Are there events? There's not as many, and they seem much more in a more stereotypical norm. And so it's even just a really small example of recognizing, okay, we have a lot here in Berlin, and outside, even not going so far, just going to other parts of Europe, it's a very different culture.
And you talked about Athens, but can you give some more examples of different culture in maybe Europe or where you find trends?
Yes, let me think for a second.
You've been to Spain or Portugal?
Yes, I mean, so I'd actually honestly say that, so I've traveled I've taught workshops in Spain and have good friends there, as well as Portugal, Italy, Greece. It's very common, Poland as well. And I think that there is a trend, like basically I think it's like this typical thing, like in San Francisco and Berlin, we think, we're so progressive, we're really making headway. But I think when I've gone to Spain, I've gone to Poland, I've gone to Greece, to just generalize, like it's still much less progressive. So I think that there are people there who are progressive, like in every part of the world, there's a little bit of everything. But I think in general, these concepts like being in a polyamorous relationship, or even just having a kind of sexual interaction with a friend, and maybe that sexual interaction might also be hurting each other. It might not necessarily be like traditional, what you would think of when you think of the word sex, is still very new. And so I still think that the world is in this process of opening up. And as well, there's also a lot of rejection. So when you look at politics in Hungary and Russia, you know, we're rejecting already just being gay. And then when we sit here in Germany or in the US, for instance, we think that, you know, that is so already been so integrated in the norm, at least in comparison to the rest of the world, that it's a little bit shocking to think that there's people running for their lives. I also was teaching mathematics in Chile, and I had a really strong experience where I went to a gay bar, and I just was speaking with some locals, and they were telling us that hate crimes were not illegal at the time, and that a transgender person was actually like killed on the streets like 2 months before then. And this was the only street. There was like 2 streets at the gay bar, and we were on one of these 2, and that like people were afraid for their lives because just being in this bar was like a political act. And there was also lots of like neo-Nazi propaganda that you would find on the streets and so on. And of course, this paints a really dark picture. I mean, it's not like Chile is all neo-Nazis and like homophobic people, but it was really terrifying. It was really terrifying to see that at this time, which wasn't that long ago, just a couple of years ago, there was people being murdered on the streets and people being afraid of being gay. And that's just in my mind, the tip of the iceberg, you know, like let alone talk about being gay and being in many relationships of different kinds and having different sexualities and different gender and different preferences, and being able to kind of be more fluid with your life. So yeah, I think that there's still a lot of work to do.
So do you think the extreme diversity that is offered by Berlin, where people identify as so many different things, do you think it's also a kind of a trap, maybe? Could it be?
I don't know how. Is it a trap? Is it a trap? I think as a person who is a mathematician who loves definitions, I also try to ask myself, is definition sometimes necessary? And I think that we get into a trap of trying to over-define ourselves, but this trap also comes from the fact that the society insists that we define ourselves. And so when the society insists that we define ourselves, we have to try to come up with definitions. And then it's hard to define, and then it's hard to put ourselves in a box, and then we kind of get this terrible effect of like no box fits, and we try to create a new box, and then we move boxes, and then I think that you kind of get, then it kind of breaks apart. So, and maybe this is the process that we need to have, because we're given really strong definitions. This is a man and this is a woman, and we're slowly breaking that apart. And this is what it means to have sex, and this is what it means to be in a relationship, and you must be with one person and they must love you forever, and you can't look at that person in a bar or you're a sinner. And like, yeah, I think that there's like a lot to kind of maybe redefine and then break down. So maybe it's just the process we have to go through. But as an example for myself, I try to, with gender, try not to like, just think for myself almost like an exercise, like, is it necessary to talk about gender in this moment? And I've come to realize that when I ask myself this question, like in this moment, in this scenario, and is it relevant at all? And I would have to say that it's almost never relevant. So usually maybe I'm not talking about a man, but I'm just talking about tall people. So maybe I should talk about tall people and not men, or maybe people with long hair and not women, because no longer actually it's nothing to do with gender, it's having to do with other qualities often. So it's just an example, but I even invite people to do this exercise, like when they bring up gender, when they bring up the woman postman over there, is it really necessary to say woman? Like, and just asking that question. And I think I find that most of the time, these definitions, these boxes are not so important, and that it's better to boil things down into the real, like, what we're really talking about. Like, are we talking about a physical trait? Are we talking about, like, an emotional trait? Are we talking about a cultural trait? Like, what is it actually that we're talking about? And to talk about that rather than, like, fiddling around with all these boxes. Even though I think that it might be necessary to go through, I don't know, maybe this society has to go through that, but I hope and I think in the end we won't need any of that. Just we will all be people in some way, and we will not talk necessarily about these things so much anymore, only when it's relevant.
Okay.
Yeah.
You talked about workshops that you're giving. Can you describe how a workshop looks like? Yeah.
So usually a workshop is centered around a particular topic. So for instance, the topic that I focus on a lot in these past years is shame and humiliation, and also playing with those feelings, and what does it mean to play with these feelings. And that's a really scary topic. It's a really scary topic for people, and it was really a fun challenge to kind of come up with a format, because I guess the idea of a workshop is to have facilitate a space in which people can explore for themselves the themes that are kind of presented in this workshop. So maybe a theme might be less abstract and intense as shame and humiliation. It might be impact play, or like intro to rope bondage, or it might be nonverbal communication, or it might be consent, but there's always a kind of theme. And then as a facilitator, I think every facilitator has their own style. What I try to do is come up with different exercises and different discussion topics in different ways in which people can explore the topic, but also where they can do it on their own pace and in their own way. So it's not like you must all, do this certain activity now, regardless of how comfortable you feel, but to more give a frame and a direction, and then people to go off and explore in a way, and then come back and to talk about it together as a group if people feel like it. And I think the job of the facilitator is to create a space where people feel comfortable and people feel like they have all that they need to feel like they can comfortably challenge themselves and to like help regulate this pace. So usually when you might see this kind of this title, for instance, shame and humiliation play, you might read the description, but and maybe you're interested or not, but what you should expect is really a space where you can go in and you can challenge yourself as much as you want. And there's somebody there who has experience, who can help kind of set a frame and make sure you have what you need. So in this sense, it's not like anyone's forcing you to do anything you don't want to do. It's more like knowledge and exploration and some skill sharing depending on the topic.
And what kind of people are visiting your workshops? Mainly couples or singles or?
Everyone,
okay.
Which is something I really like. Of course, there's been instances where I've had workshops with couples, and there are some topics, like for instance with rope bondage, where it makes sense that people come as two people. But I also don't like to frame it, even in this case, as couples. I like to say pairs, because you can have two friends coming to a rope bondage class and tying with each other, and this might be part of their friendship and their interaction. And it doesn't necessarily, even if one gets turned on, it doesn't necessarily have to mean that they're automatically like in a romantic relationship. And then in other workshops, I like to try to keep the structure free, so that people can come as a single, they can come with a group, they can come with one other person, and they can also feel free, because I think often there's this pressure in our society that like, I must have a partner, I must have a romantic partner, and I also must wait until I have all of that before I can finally explore myself and my sexuality and my interests. And I think this pressure is a lot. And through my own personal journey, I remember also in my 20s thinking this, and then after whatever breakup, I realized like I just need to do what I want to do and explore what I want to explore, and not wait for somebody, not wait for this whole story that society gives me in order to kind of pursue my desires and explore my desires. And so I like to facilitate that space. And I think for me, it helped me to find spaces like that, because through exploring my own desires on my own, I met similar like-minded people who are also interested in those things. And there I've met my partners and my friends and colleagues and people who I've had meaningful experiences with. And like, yeah, I wouldn't have been able to do that if I just sat waiting. So I try to return the favor.
Okay. So I got some questions. Can you describe what impact play is and what kind of humiliations you're teaching?
Yes. So with impact play specifically, usually when people say impact play, it means taking some kind of tool or methods for hitting the body in a forceful way to make an impact. So for instance, people use things called paddles, like they have maybe a flat surface, or things that have a long circular surface, or things like a flogger, which have kind of many little pieces attached to them, and to learn like where you can use them on the body and how they feel. And yes. different ways in which you can cause impact to the body and to play with that. And that doesn't mean like beating somebody up. It can mean that, but also to find a like experiment and play with the border. Like, how does it feel when you make a soft impact? Maybe that can have more of an impact because maybe it gives a strong emotional impact. And or like sometimes some people, they realize that soft feelings are much more hard for them to manage than like more hard feelings, and also how to impact the body like on different layers, like deep tissue muscles, like similar to a deep tissue massage, or like more on the surface. And so it's like playing with this physical impact. And then in shame and humiliation play, I like to talk about first what humiliation is. And so humiliation is having your status lowered in front of others. So it's a very interesting topic because I think we've all experienced humiliation in our lives, but to actually take this definition and say, okay, it actually has a lot to do with a culture and being in a group. And try to then explore what are different ways. Then if we want to play with humiliation, like how can we lower the status of somebody like in a group, with also acknowledging that like we're all coming as equals. And there's different areas I like to explore this with, like with the group. And we do things like dehumanizing someone, but that can also mean like making them your puppy. And this can be humiliating, but it also doesn't necessarily have to be shameful, right? Because maybe being a puppy is the most freeing thing in the whole world. Like you can pee on the ground, you can eat from a bowl, you can run free, you don't have to work. Like maybe it's like actually much, much better than being a human, but still in the hierarchy of the family, in the hierarchy of the house, you might have a much lower status. And for instance, maybe if you pee on the ground, then your owner might punish you because that was bad behavior or a behavior that the owner doesn't like, and they want to kind of be strict with you. And then you're kind of reminded of your position and you're kind of then put down. So to play with this idea of like, okay, you can, if we're all humans, we're all equal humans, you can actually take someone, like make them not a human. So you could also objectify someone, you could make someone like a piece of furniture, for instance. So then if somebody becomes your footstool and you remind them how they're your footstool, you treat them like a footstool, it also can be very humiliating because like you show them you're not a human anymore. You're a piece of furniture. You're even lower than my dog maybe. Or maybe the person that's their most favorite item in the whole world and they love their footstool. They treat it really nicely, but it's still a footstool. So also I like to explore this idea that humiliation is something different than shame, and that it's really about status, and it's a power, it's kind of a recognition of power, or like a taking someone's power away publicly. And then with shame, then we introduce the idea of shame, and what shame is it's like there's some value system in this culture that we live in, like that has defined like what it means to have power and not. So like how to humiliate something, which defines how to humiliate somebody or not. And then shame is like recognizing that there's something wrong with you. There's something inherently wrong with you in terms of this value system. So for instance, maybe in society, it's your hair color. So your hair color is not, like red enough. So maybe we live in a society where red hair is the good hair, and if your hair is not red enough, like there's something wrong with you. And then you can feel ashamed because your hair is not red enough, and people might put you down for that, and you will feel like, okay, you're inherently not valuable, or less valuable. And so shame is it's a feeling, and it's a kind of humiliation. there was the topic of humiliation, and then there's the topic of shame. And shame and humiliation, like shame is like a subset of humiliation in a way, because humiliation is like, it's first, like I said, defined by the culture we live in, of what does it mean to be less than somebody else, and then pointing out that somebody is less. And that's kind of humiliating them. Also in a group, I mean, of course, a group can just be 2 people, but like this kind of public recognition that you are here, you are less somehow, in terms of status, in terms of our value system. And shame is like this recognition of the individual, like it's like a feeling that says, there's something inherently wrong with me. Like it's not the same as guilt, where guilt is maybe like you break a rule and you feel bad about it, and that's kind of, you feel guilty because you know you broke a rule, you violated some principles, some agreement, and you feel guilty about it. And shame is more about, I am wrong. And where does this I am wrong come from? This I am wrong comes from the culture that we live in that defines what it means for something to be right and wrong. So as a made up example, maybe we live in a society where people have red hair, and if you don't have red hair, that's like the worst thing in the world. And then maybe if somebody has less red hair than somebody else, then they can feel ashamed, like, I'm less valuable, I'm less beautiful, I'm less perfect because of this quality that I have. And it doesn't matter whether or not it's like valid or something like this, or that it makes sense. I mean, if you have red hair, then like you're born with it, so you cannot change it. But maybe the society still says, like, you still have internalized this idea of like what it means to be a more valuable human or not, or what it means to be like a better human or a more correct human or not. So, and I mean, I think we all have shame, like not from our cultures and from the culture of our family, the culture of our school we grew up, the culture of our friend groups, the culture of our city, this kind of the culture of our country, and so on. And I think that this then makes shame really complicated, because we have so many individual ideas of what it means to be good or not, and like right or not, and valid or not, and that it also shapes how we behave, shame. So it's super deep, because maybe you don't do something because you're ashamed of doing something, because I want to do this, but I'm taught, or I feel there's something I embody that comes from somewhere that says, if I do this, if I have 2 partners, then I'm a bad person. You know, then there is something wrong with me if I do that. So, and then when we explore shame in a workshop, it's challenging, because first you have to recognize your own shame, and shame is something that we often run away from. And so to facilitate a group of people where we first have to get in touch with our own feelings of shame, and then to take the next step of like, how do we confront those feelings, and maybe allow another person to help us confront those feelings, and to even play with those feelings, maybe go into a role play scenario where those feelings are confronted. Like, you know, for instance, maybe somebody feels really ashamed of being gay, you know, and maybe they've done a lot of work to get through that, but still society has told them that's shameful, and to make a scenario around where they have to maybe confront that shame, it's quite challenging. So it's a slow build up, but also like more of a structure where we can all have time to think about and recognize our shames, and we don't have to share them or not in the workshop, but to get to a place where, in the very least, everybody has thought about it. And often I think that the group feels well enough after going through so many things together that they can start to challenge themselves a little bit, challenge their shames a little bit.
And what about jealousy in this open relationships and maybe also in your workshops, but mainly is jealousy, isn't it one of the main themes in open relationships?
Definitely, and I think jealousy is a topic that I've heard come up all the time. I've been in various different polyamorous communities, like in Berlin and in general, and I've had some people even say, "Oh, I don't feel jealousy," and I say that also with a lot of judgment because I just don't believe that that's true. Like, I believe that maybe people can no longer feel jealous of a scenario that they used to feel a lot of jealousy about. I believe you can change, or I can believe that it becomes harder to find instances where you're jealous. But I think that actually, for me, again, sitting there and trying to think what actually is jealousy, and the definition I've come up with, I've found is like feeling resentment because somebody else has something that you want. And when I think about this definition, like, I'm feeling like resentment, and this resentment, I resent this other person. And it's because what do they have? They have a thing I want. And then in the end, what I actually recognize is there's a thing that I want, and this feeling tells me what I want. Like, I see somebody hugging another person, and I feel resentment because they're hugging this person because I want to hug that person. And like, actually, it's really powerful because, okay, I want to hug that person, so I can actually do something about it. Maybe I can't hug that person and I need to accept that. And so I can process that. Or maybe I can just go up to that person and also ask for a hug. You know, and then it actually doesn't become about this person I have resentment for. It's kind of like a middle way to actually recognizing something about myself. And so actually I've come to really like jealousy when I think about it this way. Not that I want to feel jealous all the time because it's not a nice feeling, but because it actually exposes like something, it makes something clear for myself, like when I feel it. Like, maybe often I'm not sure what I want, and then I feel jealousy, and I have to confront that and think, okay, but I feel jealousy now, so there is something here, that I want that's bothering me, and I am upset at this other person because they're like a mirror for me. They're showing me what I want, like in front of my face or in some way. So I wish that in the open relationship world we would talk more about jealousy in this way. I think some people do. I don't think this is like the most original idea and I'm the only one who's come up with this, but I wish that instead of rejecting jealousy and talking about it as if it's a goal to never feel jealous, I think it's more important to recognize that we can't control how we feel, but our feelings tell us useful information. And jealousy is a useful feeling because it tells us something about what we want. And I think once we recognize what we want, we can like be productive rather than just having this blind resentment and anger. So yeah, I like jealousy then for this reason.
And the other thing is open relationships, there are also certain risks of losing the partner. You can always lose your partner, but I think in open relationships it's harder for most people to have some security, maybe.
Yes, I think that is a really big topic in open relationships. And I think it's really understandable, and it's something that I've faced often. So I've been in like monogamous relationships and super open relationships and relationships that are in between. And I think that in all these relationships, like this fear is always there. And I think for me personally, this is something that's been important for me to recognize in like processing relationships and how I want to live my relationships, and recognizing that even if I marry somebody, even if I make a contract with them, that still doesn't mean, like, I don't own them, you know, and it still doesn't mean that they'll stay with me. Like in monogamous relationships, people cheat, people get divorced, people break up, maybe even they break up because they might not be able to pursue or realize something that they want to realize, and this causes a drift. And of course, the same kinds of things can happen in open relationships too. I think for me, then open relationship becomes more about how do I want to define my relationship, and what do I want to keep just between me and my partner, and what do I want to maybe have with other people. And I like that I can define this with another person. And for instance, my current partner and I, we like to do BDSM practices with other people. And like sometimes if I feel a little bit jealous or a little bit insecure, I also remember like, but I want to do that with other people too, and this makes us happy. And like if my partner's just gonna leave me because they just met somebody else and on a fling they're just like, you know, I think it usually doesn't happen that way, and if they do, then I don't want them to be my partner, because that's, you know, then the relationship is very unstable. And so I think it's more confronting this reality that we try to make things that make us feel secure, like again this definition thing, like this is mine and this is not, and like we try, but it's just an illusion. And I think that makes people scared, because we want security as humans. We want to feel like, yes, like, you know, I don't feel unstable. I know what is, like, I know my boundaries. I, like, you know, will not have problems, but it's just not the way life is. And I think it's a lot better to just at least talk about things out in the open, even though it's hard, then like try to create boundaries and try to create rules and try to create definitions to try and convince yourself that you're safe. Because I think we're never safe. Like our relationship is never safe. Our, you know, anything can happen, like a war can happen, you know, like now we're in a war, like, you know, our safety can be broken. Suddenly our costs are really high. Suddenly people are losing their jobs. Like, this is hard and this is life. And I think it's better to be like open and honest about it, and to practice more good, honest communication, rather than just trying to make some system that convinces us that, like, you know, there's an obligation here that we must follow this, and if you follow this, then there's I have an expectation that I get this and this and this from you, and if you don't fulfill that expectation, then, you know, this is my right. And then we get into this is my right, and then we get into guilt, and then we get into shame, and then we get, you know, and then we get into all these things that aren't necessarily so productive in our lives.
But how to avoid that with good communications in relationships, or what?
How to avoid losing your partner?
No, how to avoid this guilt carousel, maybe.
I think it's like, for me, I think it's like jealousy. Like, you cannot avoid feelings, like, but I think we can recognize feelings. And I think it's very human that sometimes we do things like, for instance, like, it doesn't mean, for instance, I don't make agreements with my partner, right? And then, of course, then if I were to break an agreement, I would feel guilty. You know, and maybe I might feel shame because I might have hold it as a high value that I always keep agreements, and only horrible people keep agreements, like don't keep agreements. And then I also shame myself. But I think it's a lot better if I hide what I've done, you know, if I hide that I've broken an agreement, I think that the guilt stays inside of me and the shame stays inside of me. And maybe there's time and my partner notices I'm behaving weirdly, and then I think eventually the truth always comes out. And even if it doesn't, it's still inside of us. The feeling is still inside of us, and I think it's better to to recognize it in some way. And maybe some people are in a position where they broke an agreement and the relationship ended and they never got to tell their partner that they broke this agreement, just using this kind of generic scenario as an example. And like maybe they'll never meet that partner again and lift this feeling of guilt. But like maybe there's another way, maybe just saying it out loud to another friend or having some way to process the emotion. I think we need to allow ourselves to go through and process feelings and process experiences, and also recognize that we as humans are not perfect and we do things that are, you know, bad, or, you know, like we feel we're bad, or break agreements, or lie, or cheat, or make mistakes, or break a glass. And I think it's just better to, for me personally, it's my own personal life philosophy, it's better to just say it out loud and admit it and let myself go through it than then hold it inside, that I never let myself process it. And I think that then I'm also accepting what I've done, rather than pretending or avoiding that I haven't done something wrong. So I think that's also can be very damaging. And I think also when we don't process something, we can kind of relive it over and over again because it's still inside of us. So I think more if I say to my partner, I broke this agreement and I'm really sorry and I'm willing to accept the consequences for this, I also recognize there are consequences for my actions, and like maybe then I will be more mindful about my actions rather than trying to just cover one mistake up over the next. So I don't know if it's really an answer to the question, but I think it's more that I don't believe there's a way to avoid the spiral. I think we just always have to go through it, and I think the sooner the better. Like in English, it's the expression like rip the band-aid. So just like rip it off rather than like slowly, you know. I think it's gonna hurt no matter what, so better to just go through it.
And what do you think is the best way if you got a certain desire and you're not sure that your partner will accept it, how to address it?
That's a really good question, because I think that it can be really complicated. But I think also first that if you have a desire and it affects your partner, like as an example, you would like to try rope bondage. And you're afraid your partner might think you're a weirdo for even doing that, and you might think that they like won't do that, or hate you, or leave you, or whatever. Like, or another example could be cheating. Maybe you cheated on your partner or something, or you have a desire to sleep with another person, but you haven't done it yet. Maybe that's better. Then like we have a lot of fear, but already we're like already living out a reality without the other person. Like we've already like, you know, talked to a imaginary version of them in our head. And I think that this is not productive because we're literally making up something. So I think the best thing from my personal point of view is to talk with them. And I think that how can you talk with them? And I think there's different practices. Like I like to practice non-violent communication. And that's like a method of conflict management and like communication, of like how you can communicate in a way that is non-violent, and there's a definition for that. But also to be open and honest, and to try to be really clear, like I have this desire, I'm afraid like that you might judge me, reject me, hate me, be angry at me, leave me. We're always afraid of being left, and that's really understandable. You know, you can make it clear that you haven't tried that, or that you wanted to talk with them about it because you have this desire. And then of course, if you get into conflict with your partner, maybe your partner might have a bad reaction to your desire. They might think it is bad. They might reject you. They might get angry at you, and like also like it's okay in a way And that if you're not able to resolve the conflict with each other, I think that there's no shame, that it's completely reasonable to go to a professional to help you, to go to a mediator, to go to a couples therapist, to go to a third party that can help you to manage this conflict, because your desires are important and they will live inside of you and they will always be there, and like they will come out in a strange way, and maybe better to talk about, for instance, these strange thoughts of sleeping with somebody that you saw on the street and how they came up for you, than maybe actually just like harboring it inside till maybe you do just sleep with them and then you try to cover it up. That's maybe much worse. So I think that it's better to just try to talk about things as they come up and recognize desires, and to like also recognize how it makes your partner feel, and try to work through it and come up with a compromise and what you're willing to do and what they're willing to do. Like maybe you're willing not to act on that, but or maybe they're willing to reach some kind of compromise. You never know. Like maybe your partner has the same kinds of desires, but they're also afraid to speak about them, and maybe speaking about your desire might like help them see, like might help encourage them to also express their desires. And I've actually have friends that have gone through this process. I had a friend, I had two friends, they were a couple for 15 years, and one of them like admitted that they had been like that they were interested, there was a cis man and he's actually interested in men and also interested in men who dress like women, and he had been hiding this for many years, and he opened up about this to his partner, and she went through many feelings, but actually she was okay with this and recognized this, and also they talked about how they could manage it together, and it also opened up a whole exploration into her desires and realizing that she's actually also interested in BDSM and other things, and it kind of made them both blossom. And I think that that's a powerful story, like of like a positive story. Like you can, if you love each other, you can work through things.
On the other hand, in many relationships, you got this setting boundaries and pushing boundaries, and it often becomes a kind of power play. And
yes, exactly. And I think that this it's like unconscious or subconscious power play, and then in the end you're kind of practicing DS, like dominance submission play, non-consensually. You're just kind of pushing each other around, and you didn't agree to that, and you maybe don't like that, and then you get into a weird dynamic, and you didn't like it. The dynamic just is happening and you're not recognizing it, or maybe you're not even aware of it, and then it might go bad, you know. And I think that's often what people call toxic dynamics. And I think that like even if you're in a toxic dynamic, to at least recognize it and be like, this is, and I think that's something that has been really powerful for me with BDSM, is that it also made me more conscious of things like that. Like, we're in a power game now. Like, okay, do we want to be in this power game or not? Like, maybe we should step out of it and change what we do. I think that's a powerful tool.
Yeah, on the other hand, do you think it's an idea to say, okay, I've got this or that desire, but I can't live it out in this relationship, so I shut down the desire? Maybe. Is this a way, or is it a bad idea?
I think I cannot speak for everybody. I know for myself, like, I can have some desires that maybe seem good in theory, but I don't really want to do them in practice. But I think it's good to like recognize the desire, see, do I want to actually go through it or not? Maybe even test the waters or not, or maybe say, I can also say to my partner, like, I don't have to sleep with my coworker I'm attracted to, but maybe it keeps persisting and becoming an issue. And so maybe I need to talk about it more. Maybe the coworker tells me they're also interested, and maybe there's something I really want to pursue. And I maybe need to resolve this internal conflict between myself and this conflict with my partner and the scenario. And I think I cannot give like an answer, but I think that it's good to just be aware. You're like, I'm choosing now to shut down my desire. I try to shut down my desire, but I cannot do it. It still persists. Can I find a solution for like a solution that works? Like maybe my partner doesn't want to do impact play. Maybe I have no interest in being hit by any tool or anything in any way. Maybe they're willing to let me go with somebody they trust, maybe somebody that they can have a conversation with first, or we can come up with some way. Maybe they're in the room with me, but I do it with another person. Maybe I can find a way that I can live it out. Maybe I can hire a professional. Maybe my partner is happy with me going to a domina rather than finding like a second person to live out these desires with. I think that there's many options and they're all valid. But I think that in order to find those options, you have to like say it out loud. And that's like the hard part. It's like the first step is admitting you have a problem. Like the first step is admitting you have a desire. And then from there you can work.
So, what about loneliness in such a big city? So did you meet a lot of people? Everything is possible, but what if you don't find a partner and you become lonely? And
Yes, I think loneliness is a big topic, especially in Berlin, I feel in particular, but in city life in general. And yes, I think also it's not easy to always find a partner or to find a group or to find in a community that you fit into. So I think even when you do have such a group, you can still feel lonely. You can still feel disconnected somehow. And I think that people can struggle with that. That's also why I find community space is so important. And I think it's a bit sad that community spaces get less and less, like even in Berlin, because for so many years, Berlin, it's been really cheap to live, cheap to find venues to rent. There'll be people like random venues that are just totally abandoned. You can rent them for nothing. You can just take it over and you can have your own creative space and you can make community and you can make a place for people to go that are like-minded. It doesn't just have to be about BDSM. It can also be about music, about culture, about partying, about anything. And these get less and less. And I think that when they get less and less and you don't have these spaces where anybody is welcome to go, or anybody who is part of a certain kind of group can go, maybe a queer space that you can go and maybe you don't have you're a queer person, you don't have any friends in the city, you feel lonely, but you can go there to this space and you can feel like a sense of belonging. And I think that that's really important in a city like Berlin, these kind of public communal spaces or semi-public where you can meet like-minded people. So I hope that the city of Berlin and the world, we don't just completely eliminate these spaces because they're so important, I think, for human connection and feeling a sense of belonging.
And maybe the when there are so many possibilities, it's I think there's a higher likelihood to being dropped or drop people because there's such a giant pool you can fish from.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, and I definitely think, for instance, like my experiences on dating apps in Berlin feel very much like that. It has very much this kind of meat market feeling, this feeling of like people are just searching for things, searching for experiences, and then they don't really want to be your friend, they don't really want to be your lover, or, you know, that maybe they don't, it doesn't matter because, like you said, there's so much around that you easily can kind of go from one amazing experience to the other, and then somehow these amazing experiences kind of lose their value because like they just feel like all transient. And I think that's definitely something that, I think that's definitely a common experience in Berlin, enough that there's comedians who make whole routines about this. And I think for me, how I've dealt with it is I try my best to constantly evaluate where I put my energy in, especially in Berlin, and who I want to spend my time with and not, and what is coming out of these relationships or not. Like, does it feel like it's just some strange transactional thing and this person is not actually interested in me, or does it feel like something more, something deeper, a close friendship or a collaboration or a partnership of some kind? And it's not easy, and I don't have a right answer, because I've definitely felt super lonely in Berlin and super out of place and super awkward, and I've also had experiences of like deep senses of belonging and community, and I think, yeah, it comes and goes, and it's not easy.
I know a guy who is looking for a monogamous relationship in Berlin. Can be SM, but yeah, but he says I can have threesomes, foursomes, one night stands, a whole lot, but I don't find a stable partnership.
I think that this is a really common thing that I hear, and I don't know what exactly to say about it, except that the last two like long-term relationships I've had, including the one I'm in now, are with people that are not from Berlin. So yeah, I think there is some kind of trend or some kind of strange, vapid behavior that is unique, and I don't want to say unique to Berlin, but like it's a common theme in Berlin, common enough that, like I said, there's comedy sketches about it, there's memes about it, there's jokes about it. It's in our common Berlin pop culture, and like I empathize with your friend. I mean, I think the thing that also frustrates me a bit is I think that there's a lot of people on dating apps in Berlin where they say that they're open, they say that they're kinky, they say they have a partner, but they can date other people, and then it turns out not to be true. Or it turns out, I've had many instances when I was like meeting people for dates where the person says they're in an open relationship, but it actually turns out that the case is that they've been with the one person for a long time and they want to open up the relationship, but they're not sure how. So they kind of wrote this on the dating app and they kind of want to be open, but actually it terrifies them, and actually there's a lot of problems. And then you suddenly feel like you're in this scenario that you don't really want to be in. That's like you're in the middle of a couple's kind of issues. And I think that happens like super often in Berlin. And it's really frustrating when you're looking for a relationship, even when you're looking for an open relationship, let alone our monogamous relationship. It just feels somehow like nobody wants to define like a relationship. They want to, it's like a kind of an opportunism of people, like okay, I want to have all my options available, so they say everything and nothing, and then it's really sometimes I find personally hard to find people who are being like just straight with you and what they want or what their scenario is, and you can choose if you want to go into it or not. And I don't know if I can change the culture of Berlin, but I think that it is a kind of issue, and I wish people would just be more clear with what their scenario is, and be okay to say, I'm curious about learning about being a dom and not just writing, I'm a dom, and I don't know. I think people should, I think it's deep. You know, people are insecure, people want to make themselves look good, people want to be open to things, open to opportunities, but also there's a dishonesty in that sometimes.
I do think people are less willing to invest in a relationship, but also want to make a good deal for themselves, make a bargain out of it.
I think sometimes it definitely feels like that. It definitely feels like people are, you know, almost like trying to gamble or like trying to play their cards right, and there's this kind of dirty opportunistic feel, and I hate that. And yeah, I think that it makes dating in Berlin like really difficult, and I think that I've heard almost no good stories. It almost becomes like dark jokes, and I find that also really sad, because I on the one hand, this I don't give a shit about anything mentality gives us so much possibility. It gives us like everything, like every opportunity there is, but then like in everything there's also nothing, because if you have no definition whatsoever, it's completely diffused, then then you have nothing, right? There's just an openness, an open sea of no definition, like the air. And then of course, if you have too much definition, like too much, then you're completely restricted. It's like you're frozen. And so it's about finding this balance. Mm-hmm. And I would wish people I think what is beautiful about Berlin is it allows you the opportunity to make your own definition, and that you can change your definitions. And I think that it's not about not having any definition and just being completely like diffused into the infinite opportunities that you're presented, but to actually take a step back and say, I can have everything I want and more, and that's great. And how do I want to define my life? Like, what boundaries do I want to have? And you can do that here, and that's beautiful, but you should define something, otherwise you're just living in the ether. And like, if a definition is not serving you, then you can also get rid of it. You don't have to be trapped by like also thousands of definitions as well. So I think it's about finding this balance.
You spoke about dating apps before. What do you think? How does it influence relationships, or does this make this take and drop even more speedy?
My personal opinions, I think it makes the take and drop even more speedy. I really hate dating apps. I've never had a very good experience with the dating app. I know some people who have, but I think generally speaking, it feels a bit like, it's like this, we're living in this like post-capitalistic nightmare where I order my food online, and then I order my date online, and then I order my shoes online, and like I can just kind of have everything come to me, and it feels really consumeristic. And I think that, of course, on the one hand, I think dating apps are cool because it allows, it's how do you, in this huge city where there's everything, like you almost think a little bit like, how can I meet people? How can I also meet like-minded people? Sure, the good thing about living in Berlin is that you can go to public spaces that fit your needs. Like I can go to Kit Kat Club, I can go to Schwelle 7, I can go to also a knitting club or a football club. Like I can go to many things. I can do survival training. There's everything here, and I can meet people in those communities, those groups. But like, for instance, as an example with COVID, which I guess it's not like a forever standard, I hope, but like when suddenly these community spaces are lost, and you could also argue maybe that's happening now. Small businesses close. You can't afford to just rent a community space when it costs thousands of euros a month, and maybe it becomes harder and harder to find these places where you can meet people. Like dating apps provide us this virtual space And I think that's really beautiful and that's really valuable. But also, again, the dark side of it is this, like, it's almost looks like the platforms look almost exactly like my food delivery service app, and Uber, and they all look like I'm just ordering things. And I think that also doesn't help either. So, and also the apps want to make money, and the apps want to monetize, and the apps want to optimize, and it makes sense, but also I don't think that it also serves, like, it also really makes a strong dark side to your experience, and it becomes, also you can't take it very seriously. Like, I think no one takes dating apps seriously, and then it perpetuates the pattern that it's not a serious thing,
But what I heard and experienced is that women get a lot of attention on dating apps. They got a lot of mails, and
yes.
Males usually don't, but they spread a lot of mails.
Yes.
So how does it work with everything goes and everything is undefined thing where there's a clear definition how your chances are depending on your
Yes. I mean, I think that's also like, it's also about recognizing as well, like some definitions that still exist, some cultural patterns, like also, like, for instance, there is a dating app called Her that I'm on that I used to be on that's for women, to meet women. And I always found it funny because I would be on the app and I would see somebody interesting, and then I would say, okay, either I have to message her or she has to message me. But there's this weird standard in our general society of, like, the men should always, like, be the one to make the contact into court. And it's this very old-fashioned thing that we're, I think, deconstructing, but it still exists in us. It still exists in our generation, like this mentality. And then when it's suddenly a woman and a woman, at least in my experience, I feel like, who's gonna be the man? And then I would always have this funny feeling, because I'm a very direct person, like, okay, I'll be the man and I will write her, quote unquote. But then also there's a lot of expectations that come with being the man, which is that I then must also take control, that I must also make the date, that I must also make the courtship, that I must also be dominant, and blah, 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 blah. But I have so many other layers to myself. So, of course, sometimes I like to be a dominant person, but actually a lot of times I like to be a more submissive person. So how can I deal with being a very direct person that maybe will make the first message, but not have necessarily all the expectations that come with it? And so I think that even in, even for instance, in my experiences with women, like this like patriarchy, like kind of norm, like of like how we should behave with each other and court each other, still perpetuates itself. And like, I can only laugh, but I think the best thing we can do is be aware of it, be aware of this is what happens. And if we actually really don't want to live like this, if we actually don't want to have this kind of dynamics between men and women, or women and women, or men and men, or just people dating, if we want to deconstruct that and say those definitions don't serve us anymore, we need to work hard to do that. Like, we need to also write messages, and need to also put ourselves out there, and vice versa. And also not like shift, but like deconstruct and make the world we want to live in. But I think we all try.
One question I asked Matthias Grimmer as well is, do you think the BDSM as it was in the 80s and maybe 90s is changing now? Do you think it's was a thing of a certain generation and is now took another direction? Like, for instance, Kit Kat Club was more about BDSM, was more about having sex. Now it's more about dancing. Maybe it's also because there are more tourists, but it also became more vivid and colorful. So So what do you think, how the things are changing?
Yeah, I mean, I was not around like Matthias was during that time, so I cannot maybe speak as in detail, but even in the time that I've been alive, in the time I've been in the BDSM scene, I've already seen a lot of change and a lot of shift, and I was kind of brought in with this idea of what it was like, and I can see less and less spaces of what I would consider traditional BDSM, but also at the same time, I think, for instance, I see these changes in Berlin. So I see in Berlin, there's a lot of spaces that aren't necessarily like a dungeon, a lot of spaces specifically for queer people as an example. And I see a lot less of this kind of black and leather daddy doms and like really kind of BDSM red and black stereotypes. And so I think there is definitely a cultural shift, but at the same time, like, I think this is also a little bit in my own bubble, because I do think that when I travel, for instance, to Poland, or I travel outside of Berlin, or I travel, even there's BoundCon in Munich, like, they still have a lot of this, what I would call aesthetic, like a lot of this more traditional aesthetic, and you can still find it. So I don't think it's necessarily gone, but I think maybe it becomes a little bit less cool and a little bit less progressive. And I think also kind of it's modeled in with these old relationship dynamics. Maybe it's also a little bit more monogamous in a way. You have a master and a slave, and you own that person, and that's also a very monogamous relationship in a way, or like when you just see that dynamic alone. And I think there's a lot more like traditional social values of what it means to be in a relationship or not, and those are reflected in BDSM, or reflected in this old school BDSM. And that as our culture shifts, and as our perspective of relationships shift, and what it means to be a man and a woman and a person and a kinkster, and what it means to be in a relationship, or that you can have many relationships, or you can be more open in terms of how you explore your sexuality. You can share your sexuality with many people, maybe while even still being in a emotionally monogamous relationship. I think BDSM also reflects the society, because at the end of the day, BDSM is about dynamics. It's about dynamics and relationships between people. There's somebody who feels like have more power than the other. There's somebody who hurts another. There's somebody who ties another, bounds them, but it can also be a metaphor. Like, they're dynamics. And I think that as we change our dynamics, then also we change our play. And so I think that in more progressive areas, or areas like Berlin, for instance, where there's a lot more kind of progressive ideas about what it means to be in a relationship and the dynamics people can have together, I think that then it's reflected in the BDSM practice. And maybe if there's a rejection of the old, then that appears less. But in places where maybe you don't reject, for instance, a heteronormative behavior, where maybe the society is much more heteronormative, like say in Italy as a generalization, then you will find maybe more traditional BDSM there, or more BDSM that reflects more heteronormative behavior or conservative behavior, or however you want to call it. And I think it's just a reflection of the society.
So how do people define and find their roles in BDSM?
I think that it first starts in a way with what we're exposed to in society, or like common desires that we have, and often those are rooted in very traditional or like normative roles or normative ideas, like the idea to dominate someone, or to control someone, or to be submissive, or to let go and to let somebody do whatever they can to you, or like to be bound up, or to be gagged. And we have a lot of these images in the society, like in the like John Willie, for instance, with being bound and gagged and wearing a woman wearing like stiletto heels and like lingerie. And so you have these kinds of images. And then as well, you have also this kind of stereotypes like the secretary and the boss. And often the secretary, like when you think of, okay, the secretary, what does a secretary look like? Well, you think of like a woman often in a pencil skirt who's looking very proper, and a man, usually a white man in a suit. And so like immediately when you talk about these roles, we often have like predefined images that tell us a lot about what we're fed already. So of course the secretary doesn't have to be a woman in a pencil skirt, and the boss doesn't have to be an old bald white man. It can also be a young white man or a black man or a woman. Like it doesn't have to be But we have these pictures in our head, right? Also the doctor and the nurse. Again, the doctor is the man and the nurse is a woman. And so we have these kind of these roles, these images, and then there's a lot of shit attached to them, right? Like whether we didn't even make up that shit, it was just given to us, right? And then people want to maybe live out these power dynamics, these roles in kind of a sexual way, in a sexual fantasy. And I think in a traditional BDSM session, or in a traditional, not session, but like frame, this black and leather frame, this older frame, maybe as you would call it, they're kind of these roles. It's like, okay, you're a woman, so probably you want to be submissive, so probably you want to be the secretary or the nurse or the slave or the pet or the whatever, and then you have a master, and this master's probably a big burly man or a, cunning man, or, whatever kind of image you have, whether it's 007 or Indiana Jones, or just a giant wrestler, or I don't know what kind of image you might have, but like some dominant person, maybe in leather, maybe looking strong. We already project an image of what it would mean to look like a strong man. You don't often picture like a short man or a thin man. So I think already we have all of our social shit, all of the shit of society already just packed into just these simple questions of like, I want to be dominated. And in this traditional world, I feel like often you can kind of explore through these gateways, like, okay, I'm a woman, okay, I guess society tells me I should try to be submissive, and maybe I try that, and maybe you have these kind of few options. And I think that and I mean, I'm speaking very generally here, because I think there's a lot of people who do traditional BDSM who of course break out of these norms, but I also feel like this is where it starts, these norms. And then maybe you're a man and you think, okay, then I have to be this dominant person. And then maybe you realize like, actually, like if you're really honest with yourself, you're interested in maybe being the submissive, maybe being the pet. And maybe if you want to be a submissive man, it doesn't necessarily mean that you want to have a mistress and kiss her shoes, like that maybe you can also be, you can also be a very dominant man who also likes to be hit. And maybe actually also likes pain, and that maybe that's also okay, and there's not a contradiction in there. And so I think then you start to realize it's more complicated. And I think that in more progressive places like Berlin or San Francisco or big cities, like maybe it's a little bit easier to find these notions, and I think these notions also reflect the society. So maybe if you go to a BDSM workshop in Berlin, there's a chance that you might be in a workshop where you're not going to be given these stereotypical roles, but you're going to be given this freedom to choose a little bit more. Like you can also enjoy pain and not have to be turned on by it. You can also be a submissive man and still be masculine. You can also be a woman who likes to be submissive, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you like to be treated poorly. And I think that like there's all these different layers that we have to pull off. And I think BDSM reflects that, because we're given these dynamics purely, and then we put our shit on it. You know, we put our secretary must equal woman in pencil skirt. We put that there. Nobody tells us. So I think it's also about this reflection. And then I think also it goes back into what we were saying about recognizing your desire. And maybe recognizing your desire is like when you're maybe you're a man and you want to be the secretary, and like to confront that inside of you. And also maybe you're a queer person, but maybe in this scenario you have the desire to be a daddy, you know, or to be a little girl because you want to do some kind of like age play. And that then in that case, you maybe are more willing to take on a specific gender role. And also we can play with these roles. Also, they can in a way help us to process them. Maybe you have a relationship with being a woman in a kitchen. Maybe you're a man, but you have a relationship with being a woman in the kitchen, or a queer person, and you want to play being a woman in the kitchen. And like it also gives us an outlet for exploring also cliches and stereotypes and processing them and working through them. And I think that that's also a useful tool. Like I don't think it's therapeutic. I don't think it's healing, but I think that it can help you to manage things and process things, and like maybe also it can help in some way. And I think also maybe sometimes we have things inside of us, and as much as we'd like to get rid of them, they're there. And it also, BDSM can give us a space to like deal with them. Maybe like dealing with our deepest desires, even if we don't want them there, because we don't want to be the woman in the kitchen, or the secretary, or the doctor, or the dom, or I don't want to be in control all the time, but maybe it's comforting. Maybe you can play with everything. So I think that's its strength. And I think that's also why, in a way, I believe everyone is kinky. And I say that because I think everybody has these dynamics and these roles inside of them. And like, I think it's a natural thing. Like, children also play these roles too when they're a kid in an innocent way. And it's also, we can also play with these roles as well, even also in an innocent way. So I think it's all inside of us.
But when there are so many variations, how do you get to a natural way to meet a play partner without having to fill out an endless formula, what she likes or dislikes, or maybe what could hurt her or him?
Yes, I think it's always easier in a way to define what you don't like rather than what you like. And I think that it's important, like my personal advice would be if you want to explore something, it's okay if you have no clue what you like. It's okay if you only have one idea, if you're a woman and you're like, but I just only want to be submissive, but I don't know if really that's just my own upbringing and programming, or if that's my real desire. It doesn't matter. Like, I think if there's something there you want to explore, I think like that's like a direction. And I think it's completely valid to explore that and open that up, and maybe you try it. And I think that's why it's important, I think, to have workshops and to have educational spaces and to have held spaces where maybe you can say, I think I want to try out being submissive, and I can go to a space or a community and I can try it out slowly, and maybe with guidance or maybe with some advice, even if it's just maybe you live in a small town and there's 10 people who do kink, but at least they have some experience. So even just talking with experienced people and trying something out slowly, and then you might realize, I don't like that, but actually I like what you did to me, and maybe I want to try to do that to somebody else. And then one step will maybe lead you to a new step, and a new step, and a new step. And I think that you will explore and find your way. And I think also it's impossible to make a form because I've been doing this for 10 years now, and I think that I've changed so much as a person, and what I like changes, and sometimes it changes from day to day, and sometimes it's a slow progression over years, and some days I want to do something and other days not, and so I think it's more about building presence and like feeling what I want and then going for that. And even if I know, for instance, I love being tied, I love rope bondage, but some days, even if I know I love it and I know I want to do it, I just like, there's something inside me that says like, not today. And it's okay to listen to that. And like, so, but then in a way you can only define what is present with you now, not like you cannot, in a way you can only define the present moment.
All right.